evening, friends. We start tonight with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals refusing to reinstate the president's immigration ban. Judges Canby, Clifton, and Friedland voted unanimously to halt President Trump's ban until the courts can determine its legality. Donald Trump responded immediately on Twitter, promising to bring the case back to court. He wrote, "See you in court. The security of our nation is at stake." For more on the legal battle, and we are joined tonight by Mike Papantonio, host of America's Lawyer and Ring of Fire radio host. Mike, good to have you with us tonight. How big a setback is this for the White House, and how many options do they really have to move forward on this?
It's a big setback, but they have plenty of options, Ed. First of all, they do something very simple. If he's rational about it, what he does is he revokes and he replaces the language in this executive order to comply with what the finding of the Ninth Circuit was. The chances are he won't do that. If I read this guy right, he thinks that he can take it to the Supreme Court. He's got another avenue, that would be to ask for what they call an en-banc hearing. There are only 3 judges involved in this decision. If he asks for an en-banc hearing, that's actually he'll have 11 judges that take a look at this entire process. In the Ninth Circuit, that is not a good idea for Donald Trump. It doesn't move the ball. It's probably one of the most liberal circuits in the country. So I wouldn't recommend that. The other problem with trying to take this to the Supreme Court is they might accept it, but if historically the Supreme Court doesn't like to take what they call interim orders, which is an injunctive type of relief kind of order, they would they want to take it on the merits. Yeah, if it were on the merits, they'd say bring it on up.
Yeah.
This decision by the Ninth Circuit had nothing to do with the merits. The question was, what was the right? How extensive could this president take this his right to invoke laws dealing with immigration? That was the simple issue.
The White House has been selling hard all week long that the president is on solid legal ground. They certainly didn't expect this, but earlier this week, the president did say this about going to the Supreme Court.
Mr. President, how far are you willing to take your travel ban fight?
We're going to take it through the system. It's very important. It's very important for the country. Regardless of me or whoever succeeds at a later date, I mean, we have to have security in our country.
Is it going to go to the Supreme Court, you think?
Good, and we'll see. Hopefully it doesn't have to. It's common sense.
Well, common sense maybe to Donald Trump, but not to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The president tonight calling it a political decision. Does it matter that all 3 judges were on the same page, Mike?
I think it's really important. I think it's a strong message to the next court that has to look at this. It shows that certainly it's not a political issue, as we're hearing from the executive branch already. It's certainly not political. Look, this is a test. The test is, does a president have unbridled discretion on issues that they argue have to do with national security? This court says, look, we have some input also on national security. I think that's going to be the real test that somebody has to really look at. The biggest problem here, that if I were to test it, would have to do with standing. The very idea of Washington State saying, we're going to test the rights of individuals who are not even American citizens. We think we have standing to test those rights. That's going to be the first big question that has to be overcome. It's the question that the Boston judge that took a look at this said, you don't have standing. These folks in the Ninth Circuit said you do. So it's going to be the first question that has to be answered.
Mike, the political take here, this is the first day on the job for Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. Does he let the president handle this, or does he jump out in front of it and support him and challenge the court?
What he needs to do is give this president good advice. And I tell you, the best advice is revoke it, replace it, rewrite it, keep it simple. Don't get into an argument with the judiciary here. Simply write an executive order that conforms as best as you can by the direction that's been given to you by the Ninth Circuit. If you can do that, you can write an executive order that is at least a beginning towards that goal that you have. I think Sessions has enough sense to give him advice like that. Let's hope he does, because otherwise it's going to be a war that Trump is going to have a tough road ahead with. Ultimately, I believe he's going to prevail on the merits. I honestly do believe he's going to prevail on the merits. But in the meantime, we're in limbo land with this stay, and a lot of things can happen during that time that we're in limbo.
And there's one other element in this equation, and that is the president's pride, and we don't know what road that's going to take us down. Yeah. Mike Papantonio, great to have you with us tonight. Thanks so much, Mike. The president said recently he's learned a lot about the terror threat to the United States, and some are accusing the president of fear-mongering.
Terrorism, a tremendous threat, far greater than people in our country understand. Believe me, I've learned a lot in the last 2 weeks, and terrorism is a far greater threat than the people of our country understand.
In the wake of alleged Russian hacking before the election, Trump has assured the American people the cybersecurity of the country will get proper attention. Manila Chan is with us tonight to explain exactly what the Pentagon is doing. Manila?
Well, and the Pentagon has just approved a pilot program to counter terrorism in the battlefield of the future, which is, of course, online. For the first time in military history, the U.S. Army is offering civilian cybersecurity experts, hackers, and other tech masters a chance at serving their country and receiving commissioned status that can go all the way up to colonel. According to StarsandStripes.com, the program would be similar to existing programs for doctors, lawyers, and chaplains, because right now, as technology rapidly advances, there are gaps to be filled to fight cyber warfare from other nation states. So while other growth nations like China have been ahead of this curve, filling their military ranks with tech experts, the U.S. is falling behind. So the Pentagon is hoping to persuade patriotic techies away from Silicon Valley into a base in service of our nation. They told press that while it may not sound sexy to join the Armor's Cybersecurity Command, which itself is brand new, established in 2010, admittedly, their biggest challenge will be to get techies to join and turn down tons of that money from the Valley. So we've talked to legendary cybersecurity expert John McAfee about this in the past, about the role that this will take. Take a listen to what he had to say about it.
I have great respect for our intelligence community. Don't get me wrong. Great respect. I do. But they are behind the times. This is a new age.
And further to that, the military might be hoping to mitigate future Snowden-type leaks from contractors. In fact, just yesterday, former NSA contractor Harold Martin was formally indicted by a federal grand jury for stealing reams of highly classified documents. People are, of course, dubbing him Snowden 2.0. He, too, was a contractor at Booz Allen Hamilton. But, of course, there are cases like Chelsea Manning, who was still active in the Army when she leaked all of her information. So, Ed, I'm not too sure how well this test program might play out, but Congress has approved this trial period to go on until 2020.
Okay, thanks, Manila. In the latest round of resistance to the president's cabinet's picks, Senator Chuck Schumer said Andrew Puzner is unfit to lead the Department of Labor. In a retweet from the Century Foundation, Senator Schumer demanded Puzner take himself out of the running. The senator noted the contrast between President Trump's rhetoric on the campaign trail in favor of working people and Puzner's record as executive of the CKE restaurants. For more on this, we're joined tonight by Larry Cohen, board chair and of Our Revolution and former president of the Communication Workers of America. Larry, good to have you with us tonight. This is, across the board for union folk, a bad pick. Although it was just a few weeks ago that there were a number of union leaders in the Oval Office with the president singing the praises. What's the kind of a mixed message here? What's going on?
That's called divide and conquer, not a new idea. Goes back hundreds of years. Trump is smart. The president's smart at trying to figure out how to drive wedges. And this isn't just about unions. This is anyone who cares about the minimum wage, health and safety protection. This is a guy against all deregulation, against everything the Labor Department's done for 80 years. That's who we're bringing in.
How bad of a pick is this gentleman? I mean, of course, he doesn't want minimum wage. He wants to abolish that. The issue that Senator Schumer has been talking about is that of the question of an illegal worker that was working at his house, and there wasn't proper disclosure of it at first. What about all that? Is that enough to derail him?
Doubt it, although the question is 2 or 3 Republicans, depending on whether Sessions is replaced by then, need to vote no. The Democrats, I think, virtually all will vote no. And derail means have a majority to vote against them. That remains to be seen. But regardless of what happens here, everyone should know it's not a union issue. This is about, do working people have any protection on the job, or is it just my way or the highway for the employers of this country?
And there's other issues here. Right to work, which is being pushed. in a number of states, and then also the National Labor Relations Board. What about those two issues?
Yeah, those are yet other issues that merit a lot of attention. So the NLRB has 2 vacancies, and this president will get to name almost immediately 2 nominees, and then the Republicans will have control of the National Labor Relations Board, and we should expect that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce will be running it, and that means eliminate collective bargaining rights, even though the preamble of the law says to encourage collective bargaining. So once again, we'll be plunging to the bottom of every democracy in the world in terms of what does it mean to go to work in America, whether you have a union or not.
There used to be a time in this country when the labor secretary was the most pro-union person on the planet. And this is a 180. So what would this do to collective bargaining in this country? And we all know that unions set the bar for wages for the rest of the workers on the payroll. What about that?
The attack is on. And again, the NLRB piece for collective bargaining will be more serious than the Labor Department. The Labor Department will deregulate work for 120 million Americans, whether they have a union or not. And the NLRB will make it virtually impossible for people to have collective bargaining rights. So it's back to the 19th century law of the jungle, fighting the new robber barons. And if that's what this president wants, lots of working people will be ready for the fight.
Okay, I have to ask you, and you say it's not a union issue, but the unions do have a lot of political power.
Right.
We saw that with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Every single union was against it.
Yep.
What union's in favor of this guy, Husner?
None so far. This may be yet another issue like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where you'll see unity regardless of political orientation.
I want to know about your organization that's going on right now, Our Revolution. This is a follow-up from the Sanders campaign. Is that a fair?
Yep.
Okay. And
totally.
Where is it? How strong is it?
There's over 1,000 local groups. This is inclusive organizing. It's not rigid. These groups are very different in terms of their orientation. Those groups then come forward with people who will run for office at the grassroots level, people who will get involved in the Democratic Party successfully, like they just did in the state of Washington that reorganized, or Nebraska. Jane Kleeb, who's been on this program, is now the head of the Democratic Party there. It's taking on big issues like protesting PUSDER and getting, hopefully, thousands of calls into Republicans, not just Democrats, that this guy is not a labor secretary. So it's a wide range of things. It's really exciting to be part of it, and hopefully it'll lead to massive change in this country.
And you have supported who for the DNC chair, which is a
Keith
big...
Ellison. Yeah, November 14th, we endorsed Ellison. We have people working in every state to try to get those states' representatives on February 25th, where there's a face-to-face vote in Atlanta, to vote for Keith Ellison, change the party, and most importantly, bring it to the 3,143 counties in this country, not just the 500 that Hillary Clinton won.
Okay. Larry Cohen, great to have you with us tonight. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
The president swore in Jeff Sessions as Attorney General this morning in the White House. Sessions spoke on crime in America, terrorism, and immigration, and the president's executive orders.
We have a crime problem. I wish the rise that we're seeing in crime in America today were some sort of aberration or a blip. My best judgment, having been involved in criminal law enforcement for many years, is that this is a dangerous, permanent trend. You've led this nation to say we're going to respond effectively to the threat of terrorism, and you can count on your Department of Justice to do so in an effective way. We will defend the laws of this country as passed by Congress. And we'll defend the lawful orders of the President of the United States with vigor and determination.
Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe arrived in Washington today ahead of a meeting with President Trump tomorrow at the White House. The two heads of state will discuss regional security in the Pacific and trade. The meeting will be a significant one for President Trump. Just 3 days after his inauguration, the president signed an order withdrawing the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The president has emphasized the importance of one-on-one deals with key trading partners in the Pacific, Europe, and beyond. For more on the significance of the meeting with Japan's Prime Minister, we're joined tonight by Lori Wallach, Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Great to have you with us. TPP is gone. Japan's a big player for the United States. What happens now? How important is this meeting?
Hard to know, actually, what they're going to do, because the content of the agreement, not whether it's bilateral or lots of countries, is what really counts. So will Japan agree to the things that Trump has said must be in every trade agreement?
Those things are addressing the trade deficit, currency, and also tariffs. And at the White House briefing today, when they were talking about the prime minister from Japan coming, no one asked any questions about those things. And this is at the pinnacle of what President Trump has been talking about when it comes to getting the economy going. So it doesn't sound like the mainstream media is too focused on this. What's the heavy lift for the president?
Well, you know, what's very interesting is you got to wonder what exactly is going on. So one of his big first day promises was to immediately on day one declare China currency manipulator. Silence. Then you got lurking out there this bilateral U.S.-China agreement called the Bilateral Investment Treaty. It has literally word for word the offshoring incentives of TPP, those foreign tribunals where Chinese companies could come raid the U.S. Treasury because they have to follow U.S. laws, and rules that would make it easier for Chinese companies to buy up stuff here and operate it. All things Trump says he's against. He's been totally silent on it. So whether or not he says something about trade with Japan, the really big thing is China. It's over half of our trade deficit. 2016 numbers came out this week. The China trade deficit is $365 billion of a $700 billion trade deficit. And where is the action on China we were promised? That's the thing that I find very peculiar.
Okay. Does it have anything to do with his connections to Wall Street, the Treasury Secretary?
I'm very worried that not just the Treasury Secretary, but if you look at even the head of the National Economic Council, a guy named Gary Cohn, they're right there. And for instance, this China bilateral agreement has been a big thing. Goldman Sachs, where the company Mr. Cohn's from in Wall Street, if you Google China bilateral investment treaty, boom, Goldman Sachs pops up. So is he starting to whisper all kinds of, oh, we don't want to do that? Now, on the other hand, it seems that Mr. Trump has a likelihood to do what the heck he wants, even if it's not, necessarily within his authority. So if he wants to do the China stuff, he can do the China stuff. That actually is in his authority.
For regional security, it's almost paramount that a good deal is done one-on-one with Japan, isn't it? And is that going to be a heavy lift? I mean, the president talks about what a great negotiator he is. Look, there's a lot of Americans that drive Japanese cars. They don't want the price going through the roof. They want a great product at an affordable price. How do you put a deal together to reduce the trade deficit that keeps it good for the American consumer? And that's the balance, isn't it?
Well, I think that one answer to that is Japan has to buy more of our stuff. So if you don't want to put up tariffs and keep out the Japanese imports, then you have to figure a way for Japan to buy more of our exports. And that is, ostensibly, that would be one thing you try and negotiate in a trade agreement. But the problem is Japan really has been devaluing its currency. And so when the rubber hits the road, if the president wants a trade agreement that fixes the balance, he has to deal with currency. And that's actually something that is not going to be popular with Japan. And they're going to have to decide if they want an agreement that is more fair or they don't want an agreement. But the thing is, as far as security, national security, it's not that any trade agreement is necessary for that. I mean, the 7th Fleet staying in the Pacific. Japan and the U.S. are like this with concerns about China. Whether or not the trade agreement happens, that will be the case. And that's something that's important no matter what happens with the commercial relationship.
Lori Wallach, always a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for being here. In other news tonight, the big question is, does Washington still work at any level? Americans are frustrated with the constant bickering and lack of progress. The president brought both sides together at the White House today after meeting with the airline CEOs and promising to deregulate that industry. Trump is courting some conservative Democrats looking for support on his Supreme Court nominee. Two of the senators left the meeting today feeling like they got their say on issues.
The single most important thing we can do to reassure the American public is have a dialogue. And that's what we had, and it was far-reaching. My particular interest, as many of you know, is getting the EXIM Bank up and running. The president committed to doing everything that he can to make sure that we have a quorum so that we can begin the process of doing credits. There's billions of dollars in the pipeline, so I'm really excited. So that's a real outcome from a meeting like this, to elevate an issue that may not be front row and center for the president, but is critically important to the American workers and American business and manufacturing.
Sitting down at the table with the president and vice president and having an open conversation about many, many topics that we all have concerns, and many of them that we agree on, and how to find a pathway forward. That's encouraging. I am so encouraged to have this type of a meeting, and we're all invited to sit down and be open and honest about it. And no one got into name calling, or no one got into why he said, she said.
The White House is up in arms in response to Senator Blumenthal's leak of a statement by the Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch in a closed-door meeting between the two. Senator Blumenthal backed the leak up today.
There's no question that Judge Gorsuch said to me that he found these attacks on the judiciary by the president to be disheartening and demoralizing. In fact, Judge Gorsuch specifically said, you should feel free to mention what I said about these attacks being disheartening and demoralizing.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer accused the senator of being misleading about Gorsuch's statements.
Judge Gorsuch had made it very clear in all of his discussions with senators, including Senator Blumenthal, that he could not comment on specific cases and that judicial ethics prevent him from commenting on political matters. He has also emphasized the importance of an independent judiciary, and while he made clear that he was not referencing any specific case, he said that he finds any criticism of a judge's integrity and independence disheartening and demoralizing. So there's a big difference between commenting on the specific comments that have been made in the tweets and his general philosophy about the judiciary and his respect for his fellow judges.
Spicer also backed up the president's tone and style of reacting to those he disagrees with.
The president will continue to speak like this.
Of course he will. The president's going to speak his mind. It goes back to Thomas Jefferson, that presidents have commented on judicial nominees. I mean, the idea of one branch talking about or commenting on another branch is as old as our republic. So I don't know why. And I find it interesting when President Obama criticized the Supreme Court for its Citizens United comments in the State of the Union. There wasn't a similar concern about that.
And the president kept up the pace and called out Senator John McCain on Twitter this morning in a subject relating to a terror attack over the weekend. He said Senator McCain on Twitter should not be talking about the success or failure of a mission to the media. Only emboldens the enemies. He's been losing so long, he doesn't know how to win anymore. For more on all of this, we're joined tonight by Brian Keene, who is a Democratic strategist and president of Smart Power, and Frank McCarthy, GOP strategist at the Keelan Group. Gentlemen, great to have you with us tonight. We need an hour to talk, don't we? I mean, there's so much to talk about. First, Brian, the ruling today, how big a setback is this? And I guess the real question is the president going to let the law do the work, or is his ego going to get involved here?
Well, he better let the law do the work, and that the American people have won. The rule of law still stands, so this is a pretty exciting day, I think. And quite frankly, if he doesn't let the rule of law stand, we're going to have a serious constitutional crisis on our hands.
Where does this go from here, Frank?
Well, this was anticipated, right? I don't think anybody is surprised by the Ninth Circuit's decision today. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, right? That's the next logical step for it to go, or place for it to go. But nobody's surprised by what was found today. Everybody was expecting that decision.
Does this put the president, Frank, in a position to have a good narrative? He ran as anti-Washington. He can now say, you know what, I'm trying to protect you, but this is the way Washington works. He's already called it a political decision tonight. It's like he wants a big fight over this.
Well, if he wants one, he's got one, and I think it plays into his hands, to be quite honest with you. The American people, if you look at the polling, actually support this travel ban. They don't like the way that the media has portrayed it to be an anti-Muslim ban. It's ridiculous that they would call it that. And he's winning in that regard. And this is playing into his hands. I think it's only going to help.
What about that, Brian?
Well, for the record, he ran against Washington. He didn't run against Washington State. So let's kind of get that straight. And so he does kind of stretch the truth on this stuff. And I think he kind of said it earlier. You know, it's about the tone. It's not just the substance, but it's also the tone. And we can have disagreements, and we should have disagreements. But name calling and kind of calling out Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, it's not really appropriate, and it's not really what the president should be doing. The president this week, by the way, started the week attacking Arnold Schwarzenegger, attacking kind of all these, John McCain. This is not really what the president should be doing. This
well, there's
isn't
going to come a
America
time when
safer.
he's going to need people in the Senate. He might need John McCain someday. So,
well, I'd also just say, you know, we do have enemies, but it's not John McCain. It's not Senator Blumenthal. These aren't the enemies that we have. And so why does he do this? This is really not bringing America together. This isn't really bringing the people that he needs to help.
Well, I would argue that the Democrats aren't exactly doing their job either, you know, but every single one of these nominations that goes up there is personal attacks. We saw that play out earlier this week where the Democratic senators take to the floor personal attacks against every one of these nominees, in some cases their own colleagues in the Senate.
But Frank, you know, by the same token, you had Tim Kaine, the vice presidential candidate, has voted for every single one of his nominees. So come on, we are playing a game. We're playing along, and every single time that Trump gets an opportunity, he comes out and attacks. How about just trying to bring the American people together?
Well, he attacked Marco Rubio during the campaign, and Marco Rubio is defending his decisions this week. But what I'm saying is that he's building bridges and doing it in places where he needs to. And let's be honest, Blumenthal says he's going to support him on any part of his agenda. So why should he?
You think the president is building bridges? Going after Schwarzenegger, going after the Ninth Circuit
bringing
Court of
labor
Appeals,
groups in on his first working day and sitting down with labor groups and talking about infrastructure and building and Keystone Pipeline.
So-called judges, come on. This is like a so-called president. We're really looking at President Bannon. That's what we're talking about.
A couple of so-called senators who were calling him out on the Senate floor.
All right, how big is this meeting with Japan's prime minister? How do you view it? I mean, this is the first. This is the first, you know, major nation that the president's going to meet with where we've got a trade deficit, plays right into his wheelhouse about jobs and turning this whole thing around.
I think we're all holding our breath because, quite frankly, it shouldn't have been a big deal when he talked to the Prime Minister of Australia, right? It shouldn't have been a problem. So now we're holding our breath that he doesn't, like, hang up the phone or just kick him out of the house.
To the president's defense, no one in the mainstream media yesterday talked about Intel and the billions of dollars of investment that's going into Arizona and 10,000 jobs.
The bridges I was talking about. And one that he can build with Abe is he can talk about some of these natural gas plants that are out in the West Coast and some of the most poorest sections of the West Coast in Oregon that Japan has already decided that they're going to purchase that natural gas that they can't get to because FERC, Obama's FERC, blocked it. Now Trump is going to open that up, and there you go. That's 10,000 construction jobs right away, right off the bat.
And by the same, the Intel story was actually a story 3 years ago. That's why it wasn't really that widely reported. The story yesterday and this week, you know, the number of solar jobs that actually the biggest energy jobs this country has made this year are in solar energy. That's really what Trump should be talking about. Those are American jobs that he should be talking about. But we're not hearing about that from the White House. We're hearing about Nordstrom's.
Because the media's not reporting.
We're hearing about Nordstrom's. No, because the president's not talking about it. We're hearing about Nordstrom's, and we're hearing about his daughter's clothing line. This is childish.
Brian Keene, Frank McCarthy, gentlemen, thanks so much.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks a lot.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has apologized after the country's warplanes accidentally hit Turkish positions in northern Syria, killing 3 soldiers. Marina Finoshida has the details tonight from Damascus.
It is now confirmed that 3 Turkish military were accidentally killed in a Russian airstrike in northern Syria near the town of Al-Bab. It's a 2-hour drive from Aleppo, the epicenter of recent fighting and the scene to perhaps the most severe clashes in 6 years of war here in Syria. Much of that area is under the control of the Islamic State, so-called ISIS, and the Russian airstrikes were supposed to target their positions. But as Russia's President Vladimir Putin explained to his Turkish counterpart, Prime Minister Recep Erdogan, due to miscommunication, the positions of the Turkish army were hit instead. Vladimir Putin had a phone call with Recep Erdogan, and the 2 sides agreed to have closer cooperation in countering terrorism here in Syria. We also know that Russia and Turkey agreed to have a joint investigation into this deadly incident.
And tomorrow, Prime Minister of Japan and the President of the United States will have a press briefing. We'll have coverage on that on our newscast tomorrow right here on RT America. And that is our news this evening. Follow me on Twitter at News with Ed. Like me on the Facebook page, WeGotEd.com. I'm Ed Schultz reporting tonight from Washington. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.